So tell me the biggest challenge you're having with this new hire.
I think the biggest challenge that I have is like seeing if that person's the right fit for the company and the culture. And I feel like I'm at a point where I need to either evaluate like, hey, should I invest in a training program to get them to where they want to be in the next 3 to 6 months? Or should I just move on and bring on a new person who's the better fit for what I'm looking for?
Great question. So the first thing I would ask is, do you have a definition of success for that role? Do you know what an A player should look like and you've got something to compare their performance to? Or are you just going based off of like intuition, like I'm disappointed but I don't know why?
I think I do know now what an A player looks like in that role based on the KPIs that I've set now. Versus prior when I hired that person, I had no clue. I'm like, I just need someone to fit in this position because I don't have the bandwidth to take on that role right now. But now after investing in myself, talking to people like you, I know exactly what I'm looking for in that role. So knowing what I know now, that's the part that I'm confused about is how would I know like if that's the person that I should
that is in front of you?
Yes.
Okay, so you've got this clear definition in your mind in terms of what you want this person to be able to do. I'm assuming that the person you have has some gaps. They're not meeting that expectation in some way. Okay, step number 2. So step number 1 is get the definition. Step number 2, have you told them what those gaps are as clearly and straightforwardly as possible?
Not yet.
So that would be step number 2, right? Nobody is a mind reader, right? They might think they are crushing it and you might be totally frustrated. They have no idea what it is that you're looking for in the role because you just came up with that yourself and you haven't given that to them yet, right? So if it's a new hire, it's about making sure that they have that definition of success from day 1. If it's an existing hire, it's still not too late to come back and say, hey, I apologize that I didn't have this clearer or to you sooner, but this is what I'm looking for in this role. Here's where you're at, and I can offer you really clear guidance around where these gaps are. Because it's the most common mistake I see around performance conversations where the entrepreneur is like, God, I just wish they were better. And you're like, yeah, but if you haven't told them, how can anyone be better, right? That's the job of a coach is like, hey, you're doing great, but you need to up level in these areas. No one is self-aware enough to know where their gaps are.
Okay, so I guess the next step for me is having that tough conversation with them, making sure they know exactly what I'm needing in that role and where they're at now and if they are willing to bridge that gap.
Totally. And a lot of people put off that conversation because it feels really uncomfortable. It doesn't have to, right? The conversation or the frame is, look, I am really impressed with you so far in this role in so many ways. I want you to be successful in this role long term. And now I'm learning different things that I didn't realize I needed in this role, and we're both learning together. So my job is to be your coach and to offer you insight into what those gaps are so that you and I can work together and co-create a game plan for you to level up and close those gaps because I want us to work together for a long, long time, right? That's a totally positive outlook on that conversation. It doesn't have to feel scary, and you're probably going to get way better results out of them coming out of that conversation if they're seeing it as an opportunity to grow and level up as opposed to like a demerit against their performance, like they're on thin ice or something like that, right? And so having that conversation and then making it tangible. It's one thing to be like, hey, you got to work on your communication, and they're like, got it, boss, no problem. What does that mean, right? Like there's nothing specific there. Versus with my ops manager, she had a tendency of doing like a run-on sentences, right? She would just explain to get to her point. So I offered her specific feedback around that, and then we came up with a code word that every time she's accidentally slipping into that, I can interrupt her with the code word, and it means, hey, you're doing it again, wrap this up in the next 15 seconds so we can keep moving, right? That is a actionable, tangible game plan around a specific gap that she is now aware of and she can work to close. But without those key steps, the specificity and that like the actionableness, then you're just being like, hey, be better. And they're like, sick, So let me ask you this. If you give someone a probationary period where you define a specific outcome within that period and they don't progress towards that outcome, I guess the next step is you either decide, hey, it's time for us to move on. And what you're looking for is rate of change, right? It might be really difficult for somebody to completely revolutionize a habit in, let's say, 30 days. But if you see them working on it and working towards a better behavior, then do you feel confident that they will continue to progress in that direction? If, let's say that you set a 90-day probationary window, but within 30 days you've seen no rate of change, dude, it's time to have that conversation because 90 days is not going to change anything in that moment, right? So it's a ongoing process with that person. It's not a set it and forget it conversation. It's a conversation where we have an accountability and a game plan in place, but then I'm checking in on that with you week over week through this whole process. And either we see improvement or we don't. And if we don't, I'm very clearly explaining to you right now that if we don't, This is the definition of success in the role. If you're down here, then you're not in the right role. And we got to have a hard conversation around that. So there is your job on the line here, but I want to give you absolute every opportunity to be successful in your role because I believe in you. I'm just drawing your attention to a gap, and now we can come together and close the gap.